In 1998, Marvel president Bob Harris brought aboard Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti to head a new Marvel imprint called Marvel Knights. 4 titles would launch under this line. Those titles were Daredevil, The Punisher, Black Panther, and The Inhumans. Daredevil would quickly become the class of the line, as its first story arc would feature artwork by Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti, and was written by acclaimed film director Kevin Smith. After that, Quesada continued doing artwork with hot independent writer David Mack, best known for his book Kabuki, taking over writing chores. The third story, titled Wake Up, would actually feature Mack's friend Brian Michael Bendis and have Mack switch to splitting art duties with Quesada. And that's the book we're taking a look at today. So, let's take a look at Daredevil Volume 3, Wake Up. We open up on a confrontation between Daredevil and a villain known as the Fury. The two go through the standard hero-villain posturing and then begin fighting. Just when it looks like the Fury has begun to gain the upper hand, the world begins to melt away, revealing it to have been in the imagination of a boy named Timmy. You remember how I said that Quesada and Mack were splitting the art chores on this book? Well, that's not exactly the case. See, around this time, Joe Quesada was named editor-in-chief over all of Marvel, and because of that, he had a very heavy workload. So, Timmy's imaginary fight with Daredevil is actually David Mack trying to draw like Joe Quesada. Timmy is in a psychiatric hospital being observed by his mother, some nurses, and Daily Bugle reporter Ben Urich. Ben tries asking Timmy some questions about Daredevil, but the boy slips back into his fantasy. Urich exits the room and begins talking with Timmy's mother. She tells Ben that Timmy's been like this ever since his father mysteriously disappeared. It turns out Timmy's father is a low-level criminal named Buford Lang, who had recently been masquerading as the new Leapfrog. Leapfrog was a recurring Daredevil villain named Vinny Patilio. He wore a special exoskeleton that enabled him to leap up to 6 stories in the air, and it gave him enhanced agility. At some point, though, Patilio retired, and the Leapfrog mantle was assumed by Buford Lang, who inherited one of Patilio's discarded exoskeletons. Now, I should point out that some of the reference material in this story lists Lang's son Timmy as being autistic, and I'm not entirely sure that's the case. Now, I'll admit I'm not a psychologist and in no position to actually diagnose anybody, but at no point in Daredevil Wake Up do they ever openly state that Timmy is autistic. So I just kind of have to leave that with being a question mark. Maybe people are just jumping to conclusions. Urich goes back to the Daily Bugle and begins writing the article. However, he's interrupted by an irate J. Jonah Jameson. Urich is supposed to be covering the trial of Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin. Ben tries to explain to Jameson about Timmy and Leapfrog. Jameson points out that nobody cares about Leapfrog. As Jameson storms off, Urich mumbles, "That's the point." Yeah, essentially the events of Daredevil Wake Up are also taking place concurrently with the storyline in the previous collected edition known as Parts of a Whole. Ben returns home to his wife and nephew, Phil. Later, Ben receives a phone call from Timmy's nurse. When Ben arrives at the hospital, the nurse explains that she left Timmy with some crayons and paper in hopes that drawing would help bring him out. Upon returning, she found the room covered in pictures. The pictures depict Leapfrog fighting Daredevil. Ben tries to talk to Timmy, but still only gets superhero shtick from the boy. Urich takes some of Timmy's pictures home and begins trying to piece the whole situation together. Later, Ben goes to interview the police detective assigned to the case. He gets nowhere as the detectives laugh and spray Urich with shower spigot. Again, no one cares about Leapfrog. After that, Ben then goes to Timmy's school and begins interviewing a couple of the boys' classmates. The boys point out that all Timmy ever talks about are movies and comics. They then direct Urich to their teacher, Ms. Andraco. Andraco knows about Timmy's father being Leapfrog, and then asks Ben if he ever noticed the bruises on Timmy. Ben rushes back to the hospital where Timmy has just been sedated. Ben lifts up the sleeping boy's pajama top and finds 2 large welts on Timmy's back. Naturally, Urich then calls the police, who then interview Timmy's mother. Ben, meanwhile, goes back to cover the Kingpin trial. You know, where he's actually supposed to be. But he really doesn't pay attention to the proceedings. After that day of the trial concludes, Ben goes back to the hospital and begins trying to talk to Timmy once more. Still, he gets nowhere. As he exits, Ben notices some breaking news being reported on the television. Wilson Fisk has been shot. Again, this took place during the whole Parts of a Whole storyline. As an undoubtedly more irate Jonah begins trying to page Ben, Ben goes to the law offices of Nelson and Murdoch to try to talk to Matt Murdoch. Murdoch's secretary turns him away, and Ben collapses on a park bench outside of the office. Hours later, Ben is woken up by Daredevil. He asks Daredevil about Leapfrog. Matt recalls the confrontation. He and Leapfrog were facing off on a roof when Timmy arrived looking for his father. Leapfrog used the distraction Timmy caused to knock Daredevil out with a pipe. When Daredevil came to, Leapfrog was gone, and only Timmy was there. Ben explains that the boy was Timmy, Leapfrog's son, and fills Murdoch in on everything. Ben then takes Daredevil to the hospital, and Matt unmasks in front of Timmy, which causes the boy to remember the events involving Leapfrog. Timmy heard the commotion on the roof and made his way up. There he found Daredevil and Leapfrog fighting. Recognizing Leapfrog as his father, Timmy stared on in horror as Leapfrog knocked Daredevil out. Leapfrog then began threatening Timmy that if the boy didn't help him, Timmy would get another beating. As Leapfrog returned to beating Daredevil with the pipe, Timmy grabbed a down electrical cable and stuck it into his father's back. The stunned Leapfrog stumbled over the edge of the roof and wound up falling into a passing sanitation truck. Returning to the present, Timmy comes out of his traumatic shock and collapses into Matt's arms. Later, Ben sits down and writes the article about Timmy as Leapfrog's body is found at a dump about 3 blocks away from the apartment building. Afterwards, Ben picks Timmy up and takes him back to the Urich home, where Timmy almost immediately begins bonding with Ben's nephew, Phil. And so that concludes Daredevil Volume 3, Wake Up. How is it? Well, it's not bad per se. The storyline's not terribly boring. There's some good characterization. David Mack's artwork, while an acquired taste, is pretty good. Although I do feel his style is better suited to works like Kabuki and not mainstream superhero comics. That being said, if you were to read the entire Marvel Knights Daredevil run, starting with the Kevin Smith stuff, going through Parts of a Whole, and then on to the lengthy Bendis run, this just kind of feels like filler. It's a blip on the radar. And because of that, I'm going to have to give Daredevil Volume 3 Wake Up a C. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review. Yeah, this thing's like 500 pages long. There's no way I'm going to get this read and do a good review for it in 2 weeks. Sorry.